Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about our friend, the Sega Dreamcast, represented here by this cool, clear case one. But it's stock-ish. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have any sort of HDMI mods, and that is actually very important here. Today we're going to be talking about a new device for it from Turkey by the Behar Bros, known as the Ronin. So yes, Reddit, you were right. I was going to cover it. Anywho, before we do that though, if you guys could do me a favor, please like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, as well as check out all my social media stuff in the description. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, my travel channel, etc. I appreciate support on those platforms. Thank you so much. Let's get into it. So as I mentioned, this is a device from Turkey, formerly known as Turkey. I'm sure a lot of you know it better as. So this is by the Behar Bros. Now the Behar Bros, I've been covering their stuff for years. Once again, Reddit knew that. And these guys have been making a lot of good stuff that I've done videos on, where basically the core idea was, especially years ago, was how do I use the Dreamcast on a modern TV but have it look good? And the original idea was things like they did the Toro, the Hanzo, things where you just, because the Dreamcast has VGA support built into it. Sega put that in there, which effectively in modern day terms means it had 480p native in it, and you could access it through like a computer monitor. That was the original idea in the late 90s, or as I'm sometimes referred to as the late 1900s. Gen Z, why you do that to us? Anywho, so it had that built into it. However, to access it on more modern TVs was a little inconvenient. A lot of TVs, like widescreen, high-def TVs, didn't have VGA native, and you needed sort of like adapters and scalers and all these sort of things. And the Behar Bros tried to simplify that and give you just kind of a better way to do it. And they've refined their process over time to the point where they eventually also started giving you native HDMI out. Or HDMI out, it's not native HDMI out. But you would get things like the Akura and the Gekko, and I was recommending those to people for years because it's a wonderful thing. You just plug in the back of the console, and you would just plug HDMI into your TV, and you were done. However, there were certain flaws. One, of course, was the limitation of it being 480p. Now, I'm not going to say that this has changed, but I think that these dudes are trying to future-proof for a reason, because 480p is now a much older resolution. And I'm not going to say that modern TVs, as of now, have phased out 480p support through HDMI input, but it would not shock me to hear that starts becoming a thing, where like 720p is the lowest supported resolution or something. So just keep that in mind. The other thing was they did have occasional issues with their build quality, particularly the connection port. It's referred to as a pigtail. The thing that connects from the device to the cable itself was often kind of not great. And I noticed in my experience when I would get these things, they would work pretty well, but over the course of the time, sometimes they would fail. I know personally I had to have some of them repaired. So apparently the Behar Bros said, we're going to address all these issues. And we're going to update the system, update our device, and update the future of it. So to that end, they have discontinued the Akura, and I believe they've also discontinued the Gekko in favor of a new device known here as the Ronin. So let's go ahead and open it up and talk all about it. Now, obviously, I haven't had a chance to use it yet. We will objectively, of course, do that. But going to give me a minute on that one. Inside, we have very simple. We just have two things. One is the main course of the meal, per se. Let's get through the bubble wrap to get to it. This would be in typical Behar Bros fashion. It's basically just kind of two pieces of plastic forged together and a nice little circuit board inside. And then they have an input port and they have an HDMI output port. And over here you have the cable that goes in conjunction with it, which is one of the, like I said, this is like the pigtail part. This is the part they've kind of redesigned. So I guess originally, well, I know originally, a lot of them were just kind of hard connected in there, or they had a connection that wasn't as stable. This looks more like an S-video jack type of connection. And so you just plug it in there, and I guess that's a far more stable connection. And the pigtail bends more, because one of the common complaints was these things were forced to kind of jut out. Now they have more flexibility, so depending on your setup, you'll have a little bit more room there. Now, what's the big deal with this one? Why does it matter so much? So the biggest thing they wanted to address was the future-proofing element. This does not output at 480p. It actually outputs at 1080p. Now, what they did was they built a scaler into it. Now, initially when I first saw this, I thought they were just kind of using one of those cheap, generic, like Chinese all-purpose, 1080p upscalers. No, from my understanding, they actually designed it themselves, and they designed it tailor-made to the Dreamcast to kind of give a much better effect, similar to what I would assume like the M Classic does. Granted, the M Classic is probably more of a heavy hitter device on that particular function, so it may not actually pair too well with this for those who care about that. I might test it myself, we'll see. But basically, it's already doing upscaling, and it's doing its own upscaling, and it tries to clean up as best as it can. So that's like the biggest change other than build quality. Now, one thing that this device boasts is 100% game compatibility, and for those in the know, you'll understand why that's a big deal. The Dreamcast, as much as I love it, it has that VGA mode in, it's awesome. You got this beautiful 480p support on all these games. Sega really future-proofed it. However, not every developer actually used that. The majority did, but there is a good chunk of Dreamcast games around the world, various regions, that just don't support the 480p mode as a result, or VGA mode. So as a result, if you tried to use something like the Gekko or the Akura or the Hanzo, all these other ones, usually it just wouldn't work. And so unless they had some of those games, of all the ones that didn't work, like half of them you could force boot was the term. You would use things like Code Breaker, and some of these devices would have little switches that you'd push at just the right time and then it would go into the higher resolution mode. But then there was a good chunk of games that just no matter what you did, it didn't work. Games like WWF Attitude, MTV Skateboarding, those come to mind off the top of my head. Those just simply lacked the code and it could not be injected. To be fair, fans in the Dreamcast community have repaired some of those never work games. Actually, those two I think are perfect examples of that. So if you're using something like the GDMU or the mode or any sort of ODE solution, you can actually grab those files and put them on there, and then you can play it in VGA mode. However, it's still incomplete, and that means that this device comes in perfectly. This device, like I said, boasts 100% compatibility with every game. And the way it does that is it supports the VGA mode, so you get the 480p mode, which then runs through its upscaling processor and outputs 1080p, and you get the best you can get out of it for a plug-and-play device. Or if it doesn't support it, it runs at 480i, then in the RGB mode, then does its own upscaling, and you get a 1080p mode, admittedly not as good of a source on it, but the point is it would still work. So the idea here is this is supposed to be the ultimate plug-and-play Dreamcast solution. If you have an HDMI modified Dreamcast, like something like the DC HDMI or something like the Retro Gem, I've done videos on these. If you have those are very likely going to be superior because the HDMI modification is done at the board. This is for that guy out there, that dad who's watching this video who occasionally jumps in and he's like, wait, I still like video games, guys. I know I have kids, but like, what's going on with video games? For that dude, this is for you. The idea is you just take this, you plug it into your stock Dreamcast, and that's it. Now you can plug it into your TV and you can play your games. You don't have to mess around with CRTs if you don't want to. You don't have to mess around with little scalers and adapters and things if you don't want to. Plug it into the Dreamcast, plug HDMI cable in, your modern day TV, whether it's a 4K, a 1080p, whatever it is, it's going to work fine. And you can be able to play the games and they're going to look better. They're just going to look good. So to that end, they included two features on the device. One is the, I should note that this rubber thing started to come off while I was doing that. It seems fine, it went right back in place, but keep in mind that is a thing. So there's two switches on the side. One of them is specifically the mode I just described. It's the RGB mode. So like I said, what you do, if you play the majority of the games, it says it right here, VGA and RGB. If you have VGA mode on, that's the 480p native mode. Almost every game is going to support that, so you often won't need to change it. That's that, and then there's one other switch, and that's just the scanline generator. I personally have never really seen the appeal of scanlines, but a lot of people love it. It's like a nostalgic, warm, CRT glowing feel that a lot of people really enjoy, and to that end, they gave you a very basic scanline generator. Unlike other ones, it doesn't have a thickness option or anything like that. It's just on or off. But yeah, that in a nutshell is the device. So now I'm going to plug it in and try with a few games and come back at you with final thoughts. Okay, so it's been a little while and it's time for final thoughts. So I didn't have a chance to explain this earlier because honestly it was a much later decision, but anytime you saw Sonic Adventure footage earlier in the video, that was in fact the Ronin running in its absolute stock mode, just directly captured. To capture it, I actually used a device called the Prodigy, which is also something that Behar Bros made that they sent me a while back. I did a video on it, all that stuff. Just so full disclosure, all the footage was captured here with just these two things. This is a capture device, this is a direct output. Okay, now, All the Sonic Adventure stuff is important because that is the stock VGA mode. That is how it's getting out its 1080p content, and that's what it ended up looking like. It was good, however, I have gotten a little bit used, if I'm honest, I've gotten used to seeing the Dreamcast look better than this. Partially because I largely use an HDMI modified Dreamcast. That's typically my go-to, but I also really like the benefits of the M Classic, and frankly the M Classic is a far better scaler than what's available in the Ronin. But that doesn't make the Ronin not good. It just means they're not quite the same. The Ronin's product value, honestly, is for the people who just want one thing, they plug it in, and they go. And to that end, it actually is very good. It's better than the majority of your options. I'm just saying, you know, on a tail like of a spectrum of like 0, where like you're using RF, and 10 is like a super HDMI modified thing with an M Classic, it's somewhere in like the 7 range as far as like options go, because you can do better, but you can also do far worse. So with that out of the way, it also is worth noting how some of this stuff functions. So as I mentioned, there's the 2 switches, right? Now we talked about scan lines already, so the other one is the one that's more important. How exactly does the force boot mode work? So to that end, I have 3 games here set up. We already talked about Sonic Adventure, essentially, or Sonic Adventure 2 specifically. So NBA Showtime on NBC. This is one of those Dreamcast games where if you boot it up, you will see an error message that says, hey, this does not support this type of AV output. It's referring to VGA. However, the game actually does support VGA mode. It's just, it needs to be tricked into it. Now there's 2 methods to do this. There's the software method. I've done videos on that in the past. It's Codebreaker, boot disk, and then this disk. However, the Ronin actually has a really nice feature, as we discussed before, where it can trick it. However, you need to know when to do that. So when you boot up this game, you have to have, or any game that doesn't support VGA mode, you have to have the device, and they're labeled on here, you have to have it set to RGB mode. Then, when the Dreamcast starts booting it, you'll get to that Sega splash screen where it's a white screen, it says Sega, and then it has some black text about license and use and whatever. At that exact screen, you take the switch and you flick it to VGA. And the screen will get a little nutty for a second, and then after it does that, the VGA-compatible game will launch. Thus, you will get the full 480p out of a game like NBA Jam, or sorry, NBA Showtime NBA on NBC. Very good game, actually. Voiced by my buddy Tim Kitzrow of NBA Jam fame. Now, however, I would actually, while that's super convenient, and I actually really like that, I think that's one of the best features of it, I'm going to say the product value, like to me personally, that I got the most use out of was actually the RGB mode entirely. So WWF Attitude, as mentioned before, is one of those games that just straight up does not support the VGA mode at all. You cannot force boot it. It does not natively have it. It's just not going to work, except for the fan-altered patched versions. But if you're like, dude, I'm just a guy with a Dreamcast and a collection of my old games, I bought the discs, I just want to play them, what do I do? If you're that guy and you're in that situation, you actually want to run the disc, the Ronin is perfect for you, because you just set it to RGB mode and you launch it. So all the footage you've been seeing here of WWF Attitude is actually the 480i RGB mode, but being processed through the Ronin's upscaler. And I'm going to be honest, it looks really good considering what the source is. Could you do better? Hypothetically, yes. You could add something like the M Classic to this. However, the M Classic is at its best when it works with the source resolution, which would be 480p. Since the Ronin is already upscaling to 1080p, the amount of work that the M Classic can do is not non-existent, but it is minimal compared to a source of 480p. In other words, you could marry the Ronin and the M Classic, and it would work, and it would be a little better, but instead of going from like 7 to 10, it would go to like 7.5, or maybe an 8 if you're lucky. But I imagine if you're the type of person out there who was considering the Ronin, you probably don't care about having anything else, you just want one ideal plug-and-play device. And to that end, I would say 7. Not that it's not a good product, it absolutely is, it's just that, like I said, of the total capacity of options, again, RF on the 0 and, you know, an HDMI modded console with an M Classic attached to it as a 10, it fits in a 7. And its benefit really comes in from just the absolute convenience and the fact that it, of course, works with stock hardware. No modification necessary, stock discs, and has 100% compatibility. But that said, I have seen the Dreamcast look better through other means, but I'm also spoiled because I have access to all this stuff all the time and I see it a lot. So the average person out there is just like, dude, I want to pop on my Dreamcast and just play it. I believe you will be very happy with the Ronin ultimately. So Obviously, if you want to pick it up, there is a link in the description, and a huge shout out again to the Behar Bros for supplying this. And again, it obviously was sent to me for free for the purposes of review, but I'm sure you already knew that. Anywho, thank you very much to them. Link in the description. If you guys could do me a favor in the meantime, if you could like this video, comment down below, subscribe if you've never done that before, and check out all the social media stuff in the description: Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Patreon, Spreadshirt, Travel Channel, etc. I appreciate the support on all those platforms. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all later.